The rain hammered against the windows of the exclusive restaurant as adjusted his Italian silk tie. At 38, he commanded a business empire worth $12 billion, built from nothing after his parents died when he was 16. Tonight's charity gala was just another obligation, another chance for wealthy people to write checks and feel good about themselves. Stepped out of his black, ignoring the valet who rushed to take his keys. The young man looked nervous, probably intimidated by the car's price tag. Barely noticed anymore. Money had a way of making people either worship you or hate you, and he'd grown tired of both reactions. Inside the restaurant, the usual crowd mingled around tables decorated with crystal and gold. Politicians, tech executives, old money families, and celebrities all gathered to bid on art and experiences while pretending to care about the homeless crisis in their city. Found his assigned table and sat down, checking his phone for urgent messages from his assistant. "Mr. Wonderful to see you again." The voice belonged to Mayor Richardson, a man whose smile never reached his eyes. "I trust you'll be generous tonight. The homeless situation is becoming quite visible downtown, and we need solutions." Nodded politely while thinking about the irony. These people lived in gated communities and never saw the homeless except when their drivers took different routes to avoid them. He'd grown up poor, sleeping in his car during high school, working 3 jobs to pay for college. None of these people knew that story. The auction began with predictable items. A week in the Hamptons, dinner with a celebrity chef, courtside seats to basketball games. Bid half-heartedly on a few items, more out of social expectation than genuine interest. His mind wandered to the quarterly reports waiting on his desk, the merger talks scheduled for next week, the endless cycle of meetings and decisions that filled his days. As the evening wound down, excused himself from conversations about vacation homes and investment opportunities. He walked out into the night, where the rain had stopped but left the streets gleaming under streetlights. His driver waited by the car but waved him away. He needed to walk to clear his head of the evening's shallow interactions. The restaurant sat in the heart of the financial district, surrounded by gleaming towers that housed banks, law firms, and consulting companies. During the day, thousands of people in expensive suits hurried between buildings, making deals worth millions. At night, the area transformed into something different. The shadows revealed people who didn't belong in the daytime version of this world. Walked past a small park where a few homeless individuals had set up makeshift shelters against the cold. He'd donated millions to homeless charities over the years, but had never actually talked to anyone living on the streets. It seemed easier to write checks than to face the reality of what poverty actually looked like. As he turned a corner, he noticed a young girl sitting alone on a bench. She couldn't have been more than 16, wearing layers of mismatched clothes and a backpack that had seen better days. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands around her face, but her eyes held an intelligence that surprised him. Most homeless people he'd observed from a distance seemed broken or drugged. This girl looked alert, almost calculating. Hesitated. His security training told him to keep walking. The city could be dangerous at night, especially in areas where desperate people gathered. But something about the girl's posture, the way she sat perfectly still while watching everything around her, made him curious. He approached slowly, making sure his movements were non-threatening. The girl noticed him immediately, her body tensing slightly, but she didn't run. Her eyes assessed him quickly, taking in his expensive clothes, his confident bearing, the subtle signs of wealth and power. "Evening," said, stopping a few feet away from the bench. The girl studied him for a long moment before responding. "You're lost, aren't you? Rich guys don't usually walk around here after dark." Her voice carried a slight accent, maybe Eastern European, and held more confidence than most adults dealt with in boardrooms. There was something unsettling about her directness, as if she could see through the layers of wealth and status to something more fundamental. "Not lost," replied. "Just walking. Sometimes the car feels too small." The girl almost smiled at that. Too small? Right. Most people would think a car bigger than their apartment couldn't feel small. Found himself genuinely interested in the conversation. When was the last time someone had challenged him so directly? His employees told him what he wanted to hear. His business associates measured every word for advantage. This girl spoke like she had nothing to lose. "You seem young to be out here alone," observed. "Age doesn't matter much when you're invisible," she replied. "People see what they expect to see. You probably walked past 20 homeless people tonight and only noticed me because I'm sitting still. She was right, realized he couldn't remember seeing anyone else clearly, just shapes in doorways and shadows under bridges. His mind had automatically filtered out details that didn't fit his usual world. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl hesitated, as if deciding whether to trust him with even that basic information. "And you're the tech billionaire. I've seen your picture in newspapers." Was surprised she recognized him. His face appeared in business magazines and occasionally on news programs, but he'd never considered himself famous in the way celebrities were. "You read business news." Shrugged, "I read everything I can find. Libraries are warm and have free internet. Amazing what you can learn when you have time and nothing else to do." There was a story behind her presence on the streets, could sense it. She spoke like someone educated, someone who'd fallen from a different life rather than being born into poverty. Her English was too good, her references too sophisticated for someone who'd grown up homeless. "How long have you been living outside?" asked. "For months," answered without hesitation. "Since my foster family decided I was too much trouble and told the state I'd run away." The casual way she mentioned foster care hit harder than expected. He'd managed to avoid the system after his parents died, living with relatives who barely tolerated him, but he knew how easily things could have gone differently. "And before that?" His expression became more guarded. "Before that doesn't matter. People always want sob stories like knowing why someone's homeless makes it easier to help or ignore them. I'm here now. That's what matters." Respected her refusal to perform tragedy for his benefit. Too many people in his life told him what they thought he wanted to hear. His honesty felt refreshing, even when it was uncomfortable. "You mentioned living by the river," said. "Is that where you stay?" His eyes sharpened and realized he'd made a mistake. He hadn't mentioned the river. She hadn't either, at least not in their conversation. But somehow the phrase had stuck in his mind, as if she'd whispered it. "I didn't say anything about a river," said slowly. Felt confused. The phrase had seemed so clear in his mind, as if she'd spoken directly to him. But replaying their conversation, he couldn't place when she'd mentioned it. "I'm sorry," said. "I thought you'd said something about people living by the river." Stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "There are 47 people living in the camps by the old industrial river. Families with children, veterans who can't get help from the system, people who work full-time but can't afford rent. They've been there 8 months since the last sweep cleared them from downtown." The information came out in a rush, as if had been waiting to tell someone but hadn't found the right person. Listened intently, surprised by the specificity of her knowledge. 47 exactly. "I count them every week," said. "Make sure no one's disappeared or died. The city pretends they don't exist because they're outside the visible areas where tourists and business people might see them." Found himself drawn into his intensity. She spoke about these people like a general discussing troops, with detailed knowledge and genuine concern for their welfare. "Why do you count them?" asked. "Because someone should know they're there," replied. "Someone should remember their names if something happens." The simple statement carried enormous weight. In his world, everything was measured, tracked, and analyzed. Revenue, market share, employee satisfaction, customer retention. But he'd never considered that someone might be counting homeless people to ensure they weren't forgotten. "You know their names." Nodded. "Most of them. Sarah has 2 kids and works at a fast food place but can't afford a deposit for an apartment. Tom's a veteran with PTSD who can't navigate the VA system. Maria speaks only Spanish and doesn't understand how to apply for services. They're not statistics, they're people." Felt something shift in his understanding. The charity gala he'd just left had raised money for homeless services, but no one had talked about specific individuals. Everything was discussed in terms of numbers, demographics, and policy solutions. Talked about human beings. "How do you know so much about them?" "I listen," said simply, "and I help when I can. Share food, translate for people who don't speak English, explain how to get services. It's not complicated." Realized was running her own informal social service organization from the streets. She'd identified a community, assessed their needs, and was providing support with no resources except her own intelligence and compassion. "That's remarkable," said. Shrugged again, it's what anyone would do. But knew that wasn't true. Most people, including himself, walked past problems they couldn't easily solve. Had chosen to engage, to learn names and stories, to count people others ignored. Would you show me? Asked impulsively. Look surprised. Show you what? The river camps, the people you've been counting. Studied his face carefully, as if trying to determine his motives. Why would you want to see that? Are you planning to call the police and have them cleared out? No, said. I want to understand what you understand. I donate money to homeless charities, but I've never actually seen where people live. Was quiet for several minutes, apparently weighing his request. Waited, sensing that pushing would ruin whatever trust had developed between them. It's not a tourist attraction, finally said. These are people's homes, even if they're temporary. You can't just visit and leave feeling good about yourself. I understand. Do you? Challenged. Because once you see it, really see it, you can't unsee it. And if you're just going to write another check and forget about it, then you shouldn't come. Considered her challenge. Was he just seeking a new experience, something to make him feel more connected to the world's problems? Or was he genuinely ready to confront the reality of poverty in a way that might change how he thought about his wealth and responsibilities? I don't know what I'll do with what I see, admitted, but I know I want to see it. Seemed to respect his honesty. She stood up from the bench, shouldering her worn backpack. We'll go tomorrow night, she said. Meet me here at 9 o'clock, and mister, don't bring your car or your security. Come alone and dress like someone who won't stand out. Nodded, already wondering what he'd committed himself to. Started walking away, then turned back. And mister, when we get there, let me do the talking. These people have every reason to distrust rich men who show up asking questions. She disappeared into the shadows between buildings, leaving alone on the empty street. He stood there for several minutes, trying to process the conversation. Something about felt important, though he couldn't articulate why. Maybe it was her directness, or her obvious intelligence, or the way she'd taken responsibility for people she had no obligation to help. Walked back to where his driver waited with the... As the car pulled away from the curb, he found himself thinking about the phrase that had appeared in his mind earlier. They live by the river. Hadn't said it during their conversation, but somehow he'd known she would mention the river camps before she actually did. The next day passed slowly. Attended meetings, reviewed financial reports, and made decisions about investments worth millions of dollars. But his mind kept returning to and her description of the 47 people living by the river. He found himself distracted during a conference call about acquiring a smaller technology company, thinking instead about Sarah, who worked full-time but couldn't afford housing. That evening, chose his clothing carefully. He selected jeans and a plain sweater from the back of his closet, items he'd bought years ago but rarely wore. Looking in the mirror, he still looked wealthy. Good nutrition, dental care, and expensive haircuts were hard to hide, but at least he wouldn't stand out as obviously as he would in a business suit. He drove himself to the meeting point, leaving Thee at home in favor of a more modest car from his collection. Was already waiting on the same bench, wearing different clothes but the same alert expression. You came, she said, sounding slightly surprised. I said I would. Looked him over, taking in his attempt to dress down. Better, she said, but you still look like someone who's never missed a meal. Hadn't considered that prosperity might be visible in ways he couldn't control. His posture, his skin, his general health all probably marked him as someone from a different economic class. Will that be a problem? We'll see, said. Follow me and remember what I said about letting me talk. They walked through the city's downtown area as the last businesses closed for the day. Led him away from the main streets, through alleys and side roads he'd never noticed. The urban landscape gradually became more industrial, with empty warehouses and abandoned lots replacing office buildings and shops. After 20 minutes of walking, they reached the river. Could smell it before he could see it, a mix of stagnant water and industrial runoff. The city had built parks along some sections of the riverfront, but this area had been forgotten, left to decay as businesses moved to cleaner parts of town. Stopped at the top of a small embankment and pointed down toward the water. There, she said quietly. Looked where she indicated and saw a small city he'd never known existed. Tents, makeshift shelters, and cardboard structures dotted the area between the river and an old factory wall. Cooking fires provided points of light in the growing darkness. Clothes hung on lines strung between poles. Children's voices could be heard from somewhere in the encampment. It looked like something from a disaster zone, except this was permanent. People had been living here long enough to establish routines, to create a community structure, to turn a patch of wasteland into something resembling home. 47 people, said softly. 11 families, 9 single adults, 4 teenagers who aged out of foster care. Stared at the scene, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with his understanding of his own city. He'd lived here for 15 years, had driven past this area countless times on his way to business meetings. How had he never noticed this community? "How is this possible?" he asked. "People see what they choose to see," replied, "and most people choose not to see this." As they walked down the embankment toward the camp, noticed details that made the scene even more striking. Someone had organized the shelters into rough streets, with pathways between them. A central area held cooking equipment and what looked like a community bulletin board. Children's toys were scattered near family shelters. This wasn't just survival, it was people trying to maintain dignity and normalcy in impossible circumstances. Approached a woman sitting by one of the fires. The woman looked up and smiled when she saw, then noticed and became more cautious. "Sarah, this is," said. He wanted to learn about the camp. Sarah studied carefully before nodding a greeting. She looked tired, but her clothes were clean and her manner was dignified. Nothing about her suggested she belonged in this place, yet here she was. "You're not a social worker," Sarah said or police, what are you?" "He's a businessman," answered before could speak. "He wants to understand why people live here." Sarah laughed, but without humor. "I work 40 hours a week at a restaurant, make decent tips, but every apartment I can afford requires first month, last month, and security deposit. That's $3,000 I don't have, and I can't save it while paying for a motel room that costs more per week than rent would cost per month." The math was brutal in its simplicity. Had never considered the impossible economics of poverty, the way lack of money made everything more expensive. "What about assistance programs?" asked. "There's a waiting list for subsidized housing," Sarah explained. "Average wait time is 18 months. There's temporary assistance, but it requires an address, and most programs require you to be clean and sober for 6 months before you qualify. Hard to prove you're sober when you're living outside." Began to understand the trap. Every solution required something the person didn't have. An address required money. Money required a job. Jobs required an address. Breaking the cycle seemed nearly impossible without significant help. Led him to other shelters, introducing him to Tom the veteran, Maria who spoke only Spanish, a teenager named David who'd aged out of foster care at 18 with nowhere to go. Each person had a logical explanation for their circumstances, a series of small disasters or system failures that had led them here. What struck most was their dignity. Despite living in conditions he wouldn't have accepted for his employees' pets, these people maintained their humanity. They shared food, looked after each other's children, and spoke about their situations with remarkable clarity and hope. As the evening progressed, found himself sitting by the central fire, listening to stories that challenged everything he thought he knew about poverty and homelessness. These weren't people who'd made terrible life choices. They were people who'd encountered problems the system couldn't or wouldn't solve. "The hardest part," Tom the veteran told him, "isn't the cold or the food or even the danger. It's the way people stop seeing you as human. You become an object, something to be moved or ignored." Thought about the charity gala, where people had bid on luxury experiences while discussing homeless people as problems to be solved rather than humans to be helped. Had been quiet during most of these conversations, letting people tell their own stories. But as the evening grew late, she pulled aside. "Do you understand now?" she asked. "I'm beginning to," replied, "but I still don't understand you." Looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "You're clearly intelligent. You could probably get yourself off the streets with some help. Why do you stay here, counting people and helping others instead of focusing on your own situation?" Was quiet for a long moment, staring at the fire. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before. "Because I know something others don't," she said. "What's that?" Turned to look at him directly. "I know why this is happening, and I know how to stop it." Felt the same strange sensation he'd experienced the night before, as if was communicating something beyond her words. The phrase echoed in his mind again. They live by the river. What do you mean? Asked. Not here, said, glancing around at the other people near the fire. Too many people could get hurt if the wrong person overhears. She stood up and started walking toward the edge of the camp. Followed, his mind racing with questions. Stopped in a spot away from the shelters, where the sound of the river would mask their conversation. Mister, she said formally, what do you know about city development contracts? The question surprised him. Some, I've bid on a few projects over the years. Why? 3 months ago, the city announced plans to develop this riverfront area. Luxury condos, shopping, restaurants. A $20 billion project that will transform this part of town. Nodded, he'd read about the development in business newspapers. It was the kind of massive urban renewal project that created huge profits for investors while supposedly improving the city. The plans were finalized 8 months ago, continued. The same time people started being cleared from downtown camps and ended up here. Began to see where she was leading. You think the city moved homeless people here deliberately? I think someone wants this area to look like a disaster zone, said. I think someone benefits from having a visible homeless crisis in exactly this location. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, replied. It's a fact, and I can prove it. Stared at her in the dim light, trying to process what she was telling him. If was right, the homeless camp wasn't just a result of failed policies. It was a deliberate strategy. How? Asked. Pulled a small notebook from her backpack. Even in the poor light, could see it was filled with detailed handwriting. I've been tracking the money, said. Following the contracts, the permits, the land transfers, it's all connected, and it all leads back to one company. She handed him the notebook, squinted at the pages, seeing dates, names, dollar amounts, and detailed diagrams showing connections between different organizations. This is remarkable research, said. How did you gather all this information? Libraries, public records, business filings. Amazing what's public if you know where to look. Continued flipping through the notebook, impressed by the thoroughness of his investigation. She traced money flows, identified key decision-makers, and documented patterns that painted a clear picture of coordinated action. Who's behind it? Asked. Hesitated, then pointed to a name at the center of her diagram. Read it and felt his blood turn cold. Harrison Development Group. He knew the company well. He'd done business with them, considered them partners in several ventures. Richard Harrison was someone had dinner with just last month. You're saying Richard Harrison deliberately created this homeless camp to justify his development project? I'm saying the evidence suggests someone with significant political and financial resources has been systematically concentrating homeless people in this area to create a crisis that justifies massive public spending on development contracts, replied carefully. Could see the logic. Create a visible problem, propose an expensive solution, profit from the contracts to implement that solution. It was brilliant in its cruelty. But that would require cooperation from city officials, police, social services. Yes, said simply. The implications were staggering. If was right, the homeless crisis wasn't just a policy failure. It was a manufactured crisis designed to generate profits for connected developers. Why are you telling me this? Asked. Looked at him steadily. Because you have the resources to do something about it, and because I think you're someone who might actually care enough to act. Felt the weight of her trust. Had spent months gathering this information, risking her own safety to document what appeared to be a massive conspiracy. Now she was trusting him, a stranger with evidence that could destroy powerful people. What do you want me to do? I want you to help me stop it, said, before they clear this camp and leave 47 people with nowhere to go. Looked back toward the fires and shelters where people were settling in for another night on the ground. Sarah, who worked full-time but couldn't afford housing. Tom, who'd served his country and been abandoned by the system meant to help veterans. Families with children living in conditions no human should have to endure. If was right, these people weren't just victims of economic forces beyond their control. They were pawns in someone else's game, deliberately placed in an impossible situation to justify profits for people who already had more money than they could spend. This is bigger than I can handle alone, said. I know, replied. That's why I've been waiting for the right person to help. Looked at again, really seeing her for the first time. She wasn't just a homeless teenager. She was an investigative journalist, a social activist, and a strategist who'd identified a massive injustice and developed a plan to address it. "How did you know I was the right person?" asked. Smiled for the first time since he'd met her. "I didn't, but I hoped you might be." The phrase echoed in his mind again, stronger this time. They live by the river. But now he understood it wasn't just about the location of the homeless camp. It was about the people who lived there, the reasons they were there, and the responsibility to help them. Closed his notebook and handed it back to her. "What's the first step?" "We need to gather more evidence," said. "And we need to be very careful. The people behind this have a lot to lose if the truth comes out." As they walked back through the camp toward the city, found himself seeing everything differently. The tents and shelters weren't just signs of economic failure. They were evidence of a crime. The people sleeping on the ground weren't just victims of circumstance. They were witnesses to a deliberate conspiracy. Had shown him a hidden world that existed alongside his own comfortable life. Now she was asking him to do something about it. The question was whether he had the courage to risk his wealth, his reputation, and possibly his safety to help people he'd never known existed until tonight. As they reached the street level and began walking back toward downtown, made his decision. "Tomorrow," he said, "I want you to show me everything you've found, every document, every connection, every piece of evidence." Nodded and then we figure out how to expose this and help those people without getting ourselves killed in the process. Stopped walking and looked at him. "This isn't going to be easy. These people have power, connections, money. They'll fight back." Thought about his own resources, his business connections, his access to media and legal expertise. For the first time in years, he felt excited about using his wealth for something that really mattered. "Let them try," he said. As they parted ways that night, realized his life had just changed in a way he couldn't have predicted. 24 hours ago, he'd been a wealthy businessman going through the motions of charitable giving. Now he was planning to take on what appeared to be a massive conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of city government and business. Had whispered her secret, though not with words. They live by the river. But the real secret was bigger than the location of homeless camps. It was about the systematic abuse of power, the deliberate creation of human suffering for profit, and the possibility that one homeless teenager with a notebook full of evidence might be able to stop it. Drove home through empty streets, his mind already working on strategies and resources. Tomorrow he would learn the full scope of what had discovered. Then they would begin the dangerous work of fighting back. Arrived at his downtown office building before sunrise, unable to sleep after what had shown him. The marble lobby and brass elevators felt different now, like symbols of a system he was only beginning to understand. His assistant, Jennifer, looked surprised to see him so early. "Mister, you don't have any meetings until 10. "I need you to clear my schedule for today," said. "Cancel everything except emergencies." Jennifer raised an eyebrow but nodded. She'd worked for 5 years and knew when not to ask questions. Spent the morning researching Harrison Development Group through his own business databases. What had discovered in libraries and public records, he could access through corporate intelligence services and industry connections. The picture that emerged was even worse than had suggested. Harrison Development wasn't just profiting from homeless services contracts. They'd been systematically buying up properties around potential development sites, using shell companies to hide their involvement. When an area was declared blighted due to homeless encampments, the city would condemn surrounding properties at below-market prices. Harrison would then purchase those properties through their subsidiaries and redevelop them at enormous profits. The pattern repeated across multiple cities. Create a crisis, propose a solution, profit from both the problem and the cure. It was genius in its scope and horrifying in its impact on human lives. His phone buzzed with a text from Library on 5th Street, reference section 2 o'clock. He arrived early and found at a table surrounded by newspapers, printouts, and legal documents. She transformed a corner of the public library into a research command center. "You've been busy," observed, sitting down across from her. "I don't sleep much," replied. "Too much work to do." She slid a folder across the table. "Here's what I've found since last night. Financial records from 3 other cities where Harrison Development used the same strategy. opened the folder, and examined the documents. Bank transfers, property records, and news articles told the story of a systematic operation spanning several years and multiple locations. "How did you get some of these documents?" asked, looking at what appeared to be internal company memos. Gave him a look that suggested he shouldn't ask too many questions about her sources. "The important thing is what they prove," she said. "This isn't just about our city, it's a business model." Continued reading, his anger growing with each page. In every case, homeless people had been concentrated in specific areas that were then declared disaster zones requiring massive redevelopment. The people who'd lost their homes had been scattered to other cities or had simply disappeared from official records. "What happened to them?" asked. "The homeless people from these other cities." His expression darkened. "That's what we need to find out, because if the pattern holds, the camp by the river has about 2 weeks before it gets cleared." 2 weeks? Pointed to a calendar she'd marked with red X's. "City Council votes on the Harrison development contract in 10 days. If it passes, they'll cite health and safety concerns to clear the camp immediately. 47 people will be scattered across the region with no plan for where they'll go." Felt the urgency of their situation. Had spent months gathering evidence, but time was running out to act on it. "What about the media?" suggested. "If we can get reporters interested in this story." "I tried," said. 3 newspapers, 2 TV stations. They all said the story was too complicated, too speculative. One reporter told me to come back when I had concrete proof of criminal activity." Understood. Evidence was compelling but largely circumstantial. Proving conspiracy required connecting dots that powerful people had worked hard to keep separate. "We need someone inside," said. "Someone with access to Harrison Development's internal communications." Looked at him curiously. "Do you know someone?" Hesitated. Richard Harrison had been a business associate for years. They'd worked on 2 major projects together and had always found him competent and professional. The idea that Harrison was deliberately creating human suffering for profit was hard to accept, despite the evidence. "I know Richard Harrison personally," admitted. Leaned forward. "How well?" "Well enough to have dinner with him. We've partnered on real estate deals." "Then you know how he operates," said. "Is he capable of this?" Thought about his interactions with Harrison. The man was ruthless in business negotiations and had little patience for what he called social engineering. He'd always seemed to view homeless people as problems to be solved rather than humans to be helped. "Yes," said finally, "I think he is capable of this." Nodded grimly. "Then we need to get evidence from inside his organization." "That's risky," warned. "If Harrison suspects we're investigating him." "The people by the river can't wait for us to play it safe," interrupted. "We need proof, and we need it quickly." Considered their options. His business connections might provide access to information, but using them would expose his involvement. Once he started investigating Harrison directly, there would be no going back. "There might be another way," said slowly. "I have contacts at the city planning office, people who might know about unusual pressure regarding the Harrison contract." Pulled out her notebook and flipped to a page covered with names and connections. "And David Park. They've both worked on homeless services coordination and development approvals." Was impressed by his thoroughness. "You've researched city employees." "I've researched everyone involved in decisions that affect homeless people," replied. "Has been with the city for 15 years. Park is newer, hired about 6 months ago specifically to work on the riverfront development project. Right after the homeless camps started appearing there," noted. "Exactly." Pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. He'd met both and Park at various city functions and had donated to enough municipal projects that they would probably take his calls. "I'll start with," decided. "She's been around long enough to have seen patterns." Grabbed his wrist before he could dial. "Be careful what you say. If word gets back to the wrong people that someone's asking questions." "I'll be subtle." "Mister," said seriously, "subtle isn't enough. We're dealing with people who have billions of dollars at stake. They won't hesitate to destroy anyone who threatens their operation." Felt the weight of warning. Until now, his business dealings had been competitive but civilized. This was something different, was asking him to enter a world where the rules he understood might not apply. "What do you suggest?" thought for a moment. We need a story for why you're interested in homeless services, something that explains your questions without revealing our investigation. I could say I'm considering a large donation to homeless services and want to understand how the city's development plans will affect current populations. Nodded approvingly. That works, rich guy doing due diligence on his charitable giving. Called's office and was put through immediately. The conversation went exactly as had predicted. Was happy to discuss the city's innovative approach to coordinating development with social services. The riverfront project is really exciting, told him. We're going to transform a blighted area into something that benefits the whole community. What about the people currently living there? Asked. Oh, we have comprehensive relocation plans. Everyone will be provided with appropriate services and temporary housing assistance. The casual way dismissed the lives of 47 people made angry, but he kept his voice neutral. Where will they be relocated? Various facilities throughout the region. We're working with neighboring counties to ensure adequate capacity. Exchanged a look with, who had been listening to his side of the conversation. The relocation plan sounded like a way to scatter people across such a wide area that they'd be impossible to track or organize. Has Harrison Development been involved in planning these relocations? Asked. There was a pause before responded. Harrison has been very supportive of our social services coordination efforts. Mr. Harrison personally funded a study on best practices for managing transitional populations. After ending the call and sat in silence for several minutes. His answers had been perfectly scripted, as if she'd been prepared for exactly these questions. She knew, said finally. Knew what? That someone would eventually ask about relocations. Her answers were too smooth, too prepared. Realized was right. Had responded like someone reading from talking points rather than someone explaining a complex policy decision. David Park said, let's see if he tells the same story. This phone call was different from the start. Park sounded nervous when he heard S name, and his answers were less polished than S. The development project is very complex, Park explained. Lots of moving parts, lots of stakeholders to coordinate. I imagine the homeless population creates particular challenges, prompted. Yes, well, that's being handled through appropriate channels. We have consultants working on protocols for population management. The phrase, population management, sent a chill through. It sounded like the terminology used for controlling livestock rather than helping human beings. What kind of protocols? Park hesitated. I probably shouldn't go into details over the phone. These are sensitive policy matters. Of course, said. Perhaps we could meet for coffee sometime. I'm very interested in supporting effective approaches to these challenges. I'll need to check my schedule, Park said quickly. Things are very busy right now with the contract vote coming up. After ending the call, looked at, he's scared. Good, replied. Scared people make mistakes. Pulled out a city directory and pointed to David Park's address. He lives alone in an apartment downtown, works late most nights. How do you know that? I told you, I've researched everyone involved in decisions that affect homeless people. That includes their personal habits. Was beginning to understand that intelligence gathering went far beyond what she'd shown him so far. She'd been conducting a one-person investigation into a massive conspiracy, and her methods were more sophisticated than he'd initially realized. What are you suggesting? Asked. I'm suggesting we talk to David Park when he's not in his office, surrounded by colleagues who might report our conversation to the wrong people. That evening found himself doing something he'd never imagined. He was sitting in his car across from David Park's apartment building, waiting for a city employee to come home so he could approach him about a potential conspiracy. Sat in the passenger seat, watching the building entrance through a small pair of binoculars. There, said, blue jacket, brown briefcase. Looked where pointed and saw a thin man in his 30s approaching the building. Park looked tired and stressed, checking his phone constantly as he walked. Now what? Asked. Now we have a conversation. Got out of the car and started walking toward Park. Hurried to catch up, uncertain about confronting a city employee on the street. Mr. Park called out. Park turned, looking confused to be approached by a teenager in worn clothes. and a man in an expensive suit. And this is. We spoke with you earlier about the riverfront development project. Park's expression immediately became guarded. I don't think we should be discussing city business outside official channels. We're not here to discuss city business, said. We're here to discuss human lives. Pulled out her notebook and opened it to a page covered with photographs. Saw pictures of the homeless camp, but also photos of documents and what appeared to be surveillance images. 47 people, said, showing Park the photos. 11 families, including 8 children under the age of 10, 9 veterans, 12 people who work full-time jobs but can't afford housing. Park stared at the images, his face pale in the streetlight. We know about the Harrison development contracts in other cities, continued. We know about the pattern of concentrating homeless populations in development target areas. We know you were hired specifically to manage this project, added. And we know you're having trouble sleeping because you understand what's really happening here. Park looked back and forth between them, clearly struggling with some internal conflict. I can't talk about this, he said finally. You can't talk about it or you won't, challenged. Park was quiet for a long moment. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The people involved in this project, they have long memories. What kind of pressure? Asked. Park glanced around nervously, as if afraid they were being watched. Can we go somewhere private? They ended up in an all-night diner 3 blocks away. Park chose a booth in the back corner, where he could see the entrance but couldn't be overheard by other customers. 6 months ago, I was working for a nonprofit in Sacramento, Park began. Helping homeless people access services, coordinating with city agencies. I was good at my job. What happened? Asked. Someone approached me, offered me a position with the city here. Double my salary, great benefits, chance to work on a major development project. Harrison Development? Asked. Park nodded. They said they needed someone with my background to ensure proper coordination between development and social services. But that's not what they really wanted, said. No, Park admitted. They wanted someone who understood how to move homeless people efficiently, how to process them through the system without creating political problems. Felt sick, process them. Scatter them, Park explained. Separate families, relocate people to different counties, make sure they don't stay organized or visible. Leaned forward. What about the promises of housing assistance and services? Park laughed bitterly. There are no real services. The contracts for transitional housing went to companies that don't exist. The job training programs are on paper only. The whole thing is designed to make people disappear. Why are you telling us this? Asked. Park stared at his coffee cup. Because I've met some of those families, I've seen the children, and I can't sleep knowing what's going to happen to them. Pulled out her notebook and pen. We need details, names, dates, documentation. I can't, Park said immediately. They'll know it came from me. Then 47 people lose their homes and disappear into a system designed to abandon them, said bluntly. Park was quiet for several minutes, clearly wrestling with his conscience. There's a meeting tomorrow night, he said finally. Harrison Development executives, city council members, police command staff, they're finalizing the clearance plan. Where? Asked. Private dining room at the Meridian Hotel, 8 o'clock. And exchanged glances. A meeting of all the key players would be valuable intelligence, but also dangerous to observe. What exactly are they finalizing? Asked. The timeline for clearing the camp, Park explained. The story they'll tell the media, the coordination with social services to process people quickly before anyone can organize resistance. Processing? Repeated. You mean separating families and shipping people to different counties where they won't know anyone or have any support? Yes. Made notes in her book. Who else will be there? Park rattled off a list of names that included the mayor, the police chief, 3 city council members, and several Harrison development executives. This is a conspiracy involving elected officials, said. That's criminal. Proving it is the challenge, replied. We need evidence of coordination, not just suspicious timing. Park looked around nervously again. I have to go, if anyone sees me talking to you. Wait, said. There might be a way to expose this without implicating you directly. Park paused, clearly interested but wary. What if someone happened to record that meeting tomorrow night? Continued. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. The hotel security is tight, Park warned. They sweep for recording devices. Smiled for the first time that evening. They sweep for electronic devices, but there are other ways to document meetings. After Park left and sat in the diner discussing their options, the meeting at the Meridian Hotel represented their best chance to gather definitive proof of the conspiracy, but it also represented significant risk. I can get into the hotel, said. 15 years old, homeless, invisible to people like that. They'll never notice me. Absolutely not, said immediately, if you're caught. If we don't get proof, 47 people lose their homes in 10 days, countered. The risk is worth it. Considered alternatives. His wealth and business connections might provide access to the hotel, but not to a private meeting of conspirators. There has to be another way, insisted. Pulled out her phone and showed a detailed map of the Meridian Hotel. She'd already researched the building's layout, service entrances, and security protocols. I've been planning this for weeks, said, ever since I learned about the meetings. You knew about these meetings before tonight. I've been tracking their communication patterns. They meet every 2 weeks to coordinate strategy. Realized had been several steps ahead of him throughout their entire investigation. She'd known about the conspiracy, gathered evidence, identified key players, and developed operational plans while living on the streets. Why did you need me? Asked. Looked at him seriously. Because when we expose this, they'll try to destroy the messenger. A homeless teenager can be discredited easily. A billionaire businessman with a reputation for integrity is harder to dismiss. And if they try to destroy both of us, then at least we tried to help those people instead of just writing checks and feeling good about ourselves. Felt the challenge in words. She was asking him to risk everything he'd built to help people he'd only just learned existed. But she was right about the moral calculation. The comfortable distance of charitable giving was no longer enough. What do you need from me? Asked. Pulled out a detailed plan she'd drawn in her notebook. I need you to be my backup. If something goes wrong tomorrow night, if I get caught or if the evidence gets compromised, you'll be my insurance policy. How? You'll call every media contact you have and tell them exactly what we've discovered. You'll use your reputation and resources to make sure the story gets told, even if I'm not around to tell it. The implications of his plans settled over like a cold weight. She was talking about a mission that could end with her disappearance or worse, and she was preparing him to continue the fight without her. Said carefully, exactly how dangerous do you think these people are? Met his eyes steadily. Dangerous enough that 3 homeless people from other cities where Harrison used this strategy have died in suspicious accidents. Dangerous enough that the reporter who started investigating them in Phoenix lost his job and can't find work anywhere in journalism. Felt the full weight of what they were confronting. This wasn't just a business conspiracy. It was an operation backed by people who were willing to eliminate threats to their profits. We should go to the FBI, suggested. With what evidence? Replied. Suspicious timing and circumstantial connections. They'll tell us to gather more proof and come back. Then we wait. We gather more evidence through safer methods. Shook her head. Waiting means watching 47 people get scattered across the region with no way to track what happens to them. Waiting means letting this business model spread to more cities. As they left the diner and walked back to their cars, found himself at a crossroads he'd never imagined facing. Was asking him to help her risk everything to save people who society had already written off. The smart business decision was to walk away, to donate money to safer charities and let someone else fight this particular battle. But as had pointed out, charity wasn't enough when the system itself was designed to create and profit from human suffering. Tomorrow night, said as they reached their cars, I'll be your backup. Nodded, seeming unsurprised by his decision. Thank you. Called as she started to walk away. After tomorrow night, what happens to you? Where will you go? Turned back with that slight smile he was beginning to recognize. That depends on whether we succeed or fail. And if we succeed? If we succeed, said, maybe I won't be invisible anymore. As drove home through the empty streets, he thought about's words. She'd spent months being invisible, using that invisibility to gather information that could save dozens of lives. Tomorrow night, she would voluntarily give up that protection to expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of city government and business. Had built his fortune by taking calculated risks, but he'd never risked anything truly important. Tomorrow night was asking him to risk everything that mattered for people he barely knew. The phrase echoed in his mind one more time. They live by the river. But now he understood it meant something deeper than location. It meant remembering that the people by the river were human beings whose lives had value, even if the system treated them as disposable. Spent the next day preparing for what could be the most dangerous evening of his life. He contacted 3 investigative journalists, providing them with background information about research without revealing their plan for that night. If something went wrong, at least the story would survive. He also met with his lawyer, creating a sealed document containing everything he had discovered. The lawyer, confused but professional, agreed to deliver the document to specific media outlets if didn't check in within 24 hours. At 6 o'clock, received a text from "Position confirmed, all systems go." The Meridian Hotel sat in the heart of the financial district, a 40-story tower that hosted business meetings and political fundraisers for the city's elite. Had attended events there many times, but tonight felt different. Tonight, he wasn't a guest. Had chosen a coffee shop across the street as their base of operations. Found her sitting by the window, watching the hotel entrance through binoculars disguised as a smartphone. "Any sign of them?" asked, sitting down beside her. "Harrison arrived 10 minutes ago. Black sedan, 2 bodyguards. Mayor Richardson's car is in the parking structure. This is definitely happening." Had transformed herself for the mission. Instead of her usual layered, homeless clothing, she wore dark jeans and a hotel maintenance uniform she'd somehow acquired. Her hair was pulled back, and she carried a small backpack that looked like standard employee equipment. "How did you get the uniform?" asked. "Better you don't know," replied. "But the employee who normally works the private dining room floor called in sick tonight. Amazing coincidence." Suspected the coincidence wasn't as amazing as suggested, but he didn't press for details. "Walk me through the plan one more time," said. Pulled out a hand-drawn map of the hotel's 40th floor. "Private dining room is here. Kitchen access is through this hallway. Service elevator stops here. Security cameras cover the main corridors, but there's a blind spot near the service entrance." "How do you plan to record the meeting?" Opened her backpack slightly, revealing what looked like cleaning supplies and maintenance tools. Hidden among them were items couldn't immediately identify. "Old-fashioned methods," said. "Sometimes the simplest approaches work best." At 7:30, stood up to leave. "Remember, if you don't hear from me by 10 o'clock, assume something went wrong and execute the backup plan." Said, grabbing her hand. "You don't have to do this. We can find another way." Looked at him with those sharp, intelligent eyes that had first caught his attention. "Mister, 3 days from now, the city council votes on Harrison's contract. If we don't have proof by then, those families by the river will be scattered across 3 counties with no way to find each other again. Children will be separated from their parents. People will disappear into a system designed to abandon them." "I understand the stakes," said, "but I'm asking if you understand the personal cost if you're caught." "If I'm caught, I'm just another homeless kid who wandered into the wrong place," replied. "They'll call social services and I'll be back on the street in 3 days. If you're caught, you'll lose everything." Realized was right. The risk to her was different from the risk to him, but no less real. "Be careful," said. Smiled that slight smile again. "Careful is how I've survived this long." Watched through the coffee shop window as crossed the street and disappeared into the Meridian Hotel's service entrance. Then he settled in to wait, trying to look like a businessman having a late dinner while monitoring his phone for any communication from. At 8:15, his phone buzzed with a text. "In position, audio good." Felt a mixture of relief and increased anxiety. Had successfully infiltrated the meeting, but now came the dangerous part of actually gathering evidence. 20 minutes later, another text. "Holy shit." That was followed immediately by, "Sorry for language, but this is worse than we thought." Waited for more information, but his phone remained silent. The minutes crawled by as he imagined in a room full of powerful people who wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who threatened their operation. At 9 o'clock's phone rang. His voice was whisper quiet and strained. "We need to talk. Now. Meet me at the emergency exit on 5th Street. Are you okay? Just meet me, and we're not just stopping one development project. This thing is much bigger." Paid his check and hurried across the street. He found in the shadows beside the hotel's emergency exit, still wearing the maintenance uniform but looking shaken. "What happened?" asked. Handed him a small recording device. "Listen to this." Put in the earpiece and heard Richard Harrison's voice clearly through the recording. Phoenix was a complete success. Cleared 800 people from the target area, redirected them to 4 different counties. Property values in the development zone increased 40% within 6 months. Another voice which identified as Mayor Richardson. "What about media attention?" Harrison again. "Minimal. The homeless advocates were scattered along with their clients. Without a visible crisis, public interest disappeared. We should expect similar results here." A third voice. "Timeline for clearance." 72 hours after contract approval, Harrison replied. "Police will cite health emergencies and public safety concerns. Social services will process people quickly to prevent organization or resistance." "Define process," the third voice asked. "Separate family units to prevent collective action. Transport individuals to different facilities in different counties. Ensure they don't maintain contact with local advocates or media." Pulled out the earpiece, feeling sick. The conversation confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't just about clearing homeless camps. It was about deliberately destroying communities and scattering people to prevent them from seeking help or organizing resistance. "There's more," said grimly. She fast-forwarded the recording to another section. "Sacramento is ready for Phase 2. Oakland should be prepared by next quarter. We're looking at 18 sites over the next 3 years." Mayor Richardson's voice. "What about federal oversight? HUD has been asking questions about homeless service coordination." Harrison. "We have contacts in the regional office. They've been very understanding about our innovative approaches to population management." Realized they were listening to plans for a systematic operation spanning multiple cities and involving federal officials. Said slowly, "This isn't just a local conspiracy." "No," replied. "It's a business model they're scaling across the entire region." "How many people are we talking about?" Consulted her notebook. "If they follow the same pattern in 18 cities, we're looking at potentially thousands of families broken up and scattered." Felt the weight of what they'd discovered. Had stumbled onto something much larger than a single development project. She'd found evidence of a systematic operation to profit from creating and manipulating homelessness. "We need to get this information to federal authorities," said. "With what proof?" replied. "A recording made by someone who illegally entered a private meeting. They'll claim it's fabricated." "Then what do you suggest?" Looked at him with determination that was both inspiring and frightening. "We stop them ourselves." "How?" "We make this public before they can execute their plan. We use your media connections to expose the whole operation. We force investigations that go beyond local authorities." Considered the implications. Using his business reputation to promote story would make him a target for retaliation, but it might be their only chance to prevent thousands of people from being deliberately displaced. "There's something else," said. "Something I heard at the end of the meeting." She fast-forwarded the recording one more time. "What about the investigation?" an unidentified voice asked. Felt his blood turn cold. They knew about his involvement. Harrison's voice. "It's been asking questions about homeless services coordination. We're monitoring the situation." Mayor Richardson. "How much does he know?" "Unknown, but has significant media connections. If he becomes a problem, we'll need to address it carefully." "What kind of address?" the unknown voice asked. "Has built his reputation on ethical business practices," Harrison explained. "If evidence surfaced of tax irregularities or regulatory violations, his credibility would be compromised. His ability to influence media coverage would be neutralized." Understood the threat. They weren't planning physical violence. They were planning to destroy his reputation and business empire. "They know about me," said to. "They know you've been asking questions," corrected. "They don't know about me or how much we've actually discovered." That won't matter if they destroy my credibility before we can use it. Was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking through their options. Then we move fast, tomorrow morning before they have time to manufacture evidence against you. I need to ask you something directly. She looked at him expectantly. Who are you really? This level of investigation, the way you've planned this operation, your access to information and resources. You're not just a homeless teenager. Sighed as if she'd been expecting this question. You're right, I'm not just a homeless teenager. Then who are you? My name is... My father was an investigative journalist who specialized in corruption cases. He taught me research methods when I was 12 years old. Waited for her to continue. 3 years ago, he started investigating a story about homeless service contractors in Los Angeles. He found evidence of systematic fraud and deliberate policy manipulation. What happened to him? His voice became very quiet. Car accident. Single vehicle, no witnesses. Very similar to the accidents that happened to homeless advocates in other cities where Harrison Development operated. Felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. You've been investigating your father's death. I've been finishing his investigation, corrected. He left notes, contacts, research methods. When I aged out of foster care, I decided to follow his trail. And it led you here. It led me to Harrison Development and their systematic operation across multiple states. My father was close to exposing them when he died. Understood now why he had been so thorough, so well prepared. She wasn't just trying to help homeless people. She was trying to complete her father's work and possibly prove that his death wasn't accidental. Said carefully, if your father was killed for investigating this story, what makes you think they won't kill us? Because this time we're not working alone, replied. And because we're going to expose everything at once before they can react. Pulled out her phone and showed a list of contacts she'd compiled. Journalists in 6 cities, federal investigators, congressional staff members, civil rights lawyers. Tomorrow morning, they all get copies of everything we've found. That's a lot of people to coordinate, observed. That's the point. They can't silence everyone simultaneously. Looked at the list and realized she'd spent months preparing for this moment. Every contact had been researched, every relationship mapped out. Had created a network capable of amplifying their story across multiple media markets and jurisdictions. What do you need from me? Asked. I need you to use your business reputation to validate the story. When journalists receive evidence from an unknown homeless teenager, they'll be skeptical. When that same evidence comes with endorsement from, they'll take it seriously. And after we release this information, looked at him steadily. After we release this information, our lives will never be the same. Harrison and his associates will try to destroy us both, but thousands of people will keep their families together, and this business model will be exposed. Thought about his comfortable life, his successful business, his reputation in the financial community. Was asking him to risk all of it for people he'd only recently learned existed. But he also thought about Sarah, working full-time, but unable to afford housing for her children. Tom, the veteran who'd served his country and been abandoned by the system meant to help him. The 47 people who would be scattered across 3 counties in a few days unless someone stopped Harrison's operation. What's our timeline? Asked. Smiled, recognizing his decision. Press releases go out at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I've already written them. Conference calls with journalists start at 8 a.m. By noon, this story will be public in 6 cities simultaneously. And Harrison's response. By tomorrow afternoon, they'll be too busy defending themselves to execute their plan here. The city council vote will be postponed. The homeless camp will have time to organize legal representation. As they walked away from the hotel, realized had orchestrated something remarkable. She'd identified a complex conspiracy, gathered evidence across multiple jurisdictions, and created a coordinated response that would expose the entire operation. Said as they reached their cars, after tomorrow, what happens to you? After tomorrow, I finish what my father started. There are more cities, more development projects, more families at risk. You're planning to continue this investigation. Nodded, this is bigger than Harrison Development. There's a whole industry built around profiting from homelessness. Someone needs to expose it. understood that wasn't just trying to solve a single problem. She was dedicating her life to fighting a system that created and exploited human suffering for profit. "You don't have to do this alone," said. Looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "I mean that after tomorrow, when this story breaks and my comfortable life gets destroyed anyway, I might be looking for a new purpose." Considered his offer. Investigating corruption doesn't pay well, and the people you expose tend to hold grudges. "I have enough money," replied, "and I've discovered that grudges from people like Harrison might be worth earning." As they parted ways that night, realized had given him something he hadn't known he was missing. Purpose beyond profit. A reason to use his resources for something more meaningful than accumulating more wealth. Tomorrow would bring attacks on his reputation, challenges to his business empire, and probably years of legal battles with powerful enemies. But it would also bring justice for 47 people living by a river, and prevention of a conspiracy that would have scattered thousands of families across the region. Had whispered her secret and now understood what she'd really been telling him. They live by the river, but they don't have to disappear. Someone was willing to fight for them. Someone was willing to risk everything to ensure they remained visible, human, and worthy of protection. Tomorrow, the battle would begin. Tonight felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of using his power for something that truly mattered. The recording device had given him contained evidence that would change everything. But more importantly, it contained proof that was finishing the work her father had started, and that was finally ready to discover what his wealth was really for. Arrived at his office at 5 a.m., 2 hours before his coordinated media release would begin. He spent the early morning hours preparing for what would likely be the most difficult day of his professional life. His assistant Jennifer arrived to find him already making phone calls to business partners, warning them about the storm that was coming. "Mr. Jennifer said hesitantly, "Is everything all right? You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," replied. "Jennifer, I need you to prepare for some unusual media attention today, and I need you to reschedule all meetings for the next week." "What kind of media attention?" Looked at his assistant, who had been loyal and professional for 5 years. She deserved to understand what was happening. "I'm about to accuse some very powerful people of deliberately creating homelessness for profit. They're going to fight back by attacking my reputation and business interests." Jennifer stared at him. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. If you want to take a few days off until this settles down, I'll understand." Jennifer sat down in the chair across from his desk. "Mister, in 5 years of working for you, you've never asked me to do anything unethical. If you say these accusations are justified, then I believe you." Felt grateful for her support. "Thank you, but I need you to understand that supporting me in this might affect your career." "Then I guess we'd better make sure we win," Jennifer replied with a slight smile. At exactly 6 a.m., his phone began ringing. His coordinated release had begun, and journalists across 6 cities were receiving identical packages of evidence about Harrison Development's systematic operation. The first call came from Williams at the San Francisco Chronicle. A reporter had worked with on stories about technology industry philanthropy. "I just received some very serious allegations about homeless services contractors. The source listed you as a contact who could verify the information." "Everything in that package is accurate," said. "I've personally the evidence." "This is explosive material. If true, it suggests a conspiracy involving multiple cities and federal officials." "It's true," confirmed. "And there are families who will be forcibly separated this week if this story doesn't stop it." Had similar conversations with journalists in Los Angeles, Phoenix, Sacramento, Portland, and Seattle. Each reporter expressed shock at the scope of the allegations, but its reputation gave credibility to evidence. By 8 a.m., his phone was ringing constantly. Business associates, other journalists, and city officials all wanted to know if he was really accusing Richard Harrison of orchestrating a multi-state conspiracy. At 8:30, called with an update. "It's working," she said. 3 TV stations are already running preliminary stories. The Chronicle is posting their article online in an hour." "Any response from Harrison?" asked. "Not yet, but his lawyers are already calling the hotels where the meetings took place, trying to establish that the recordings are inadmissible." "Are they inadmissible?" For criminal prosecution, probably. But for public opinion and federal investigation, they're devastating. At 9:15, received a call that changed everything. The voice belonged to Richard Harrison himself. We need to talk immediately. I don't think we have anything to discuss, Richard. You're making a serious mistake. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with. Felt his anger rising. I understand that you've been deliberately breaking up families and scattering desperate people across the region to inflate property values. That's a very simplistic interpretation of complex economic development strategies. That's exactly what I expected you to say. Harrison's voice became more threatening. I've always respected your business acumen, but you're involving yourself in matters that are beyond your understanding. There will be consequences. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. The media stories today are based on illegally obtained recordings and the word of a disturbed teenager with a history of mental health issues. Realized Harrison already knew about's background. Is the most intelligent and ethical person I've met in years. Is the daughter of a conspiracy theorist who died in a single-car accident after making similar unfounded allegations. Are you sure you want to follow the same path? The threat was unmistakable. Harrison was telling that's father had been killed for his investigation, and that could meet the same fate. Richard said calmly, every conversation I've had today has been recorded. If anything happens to me or those recordings will be released along with your threat. Harrison was quiet for a moment. You've made a powerful enemy today. I've made the right enemy, replied, ending the call. At 10 a.m., the first major news article went live. Williams at the Chronicle had written a comprehensive titled Systematic Displacement, How Development Companies Profit from Homelessness. The article included portions of recordings, verification of the evidence, and reactions from homeless advocates in multiple cities. Within an hour, the story was being picked up by national news outlets. CNN, NBC, and the Associated Press all ran versions of the story, focusing on the federal implications of a coordinated conspiracy spanning multiple states. Watched the coverage from his office, fielding calls from reporters and trying to manage the crisis that was developing around his business interests. His stock holdings were already declining as investors worried about his involvement in a controversial political story. At noon, called again. We have a problem. What kind of problem? The kind where armed federal agents are surrounding the homeless camp by the river. Felt his stomach drop. What do you mean? I mean ICE agents, FBI, and local police have core. Tomorrow night, he would find out if they could stop that system, or if the system would stop them first.